Hi team, my name is Ash Grossman. I am a biomechanics coach and mentor. I teach ambitious fitness professionals and manual therapists how to use movement mechanics in their businesses to improve client results, get them out of pain and improve performance. I've worked with some of the best functional fitness athletes on the planet, and now my mission is to empower other coaches to use those skills to help their clients to a greater level and grow their businesses in the process. Today, we're going to be breaking down the top 10 exercises post that I just put up on Instagram, just to give a little bit of context, as I know in the Instagram world of things, you only get a split second to justify your thinking. And for those of you who might have been interested to hear why I chose the exercises that I chose, here is that extra detail that you might be looking for. So, the top 10 exercises, shout out to Chris Williamson from the Modern Wisdom podcast. It's one of the questions he asks anybody who has anything to do with fitness that comes on. If they could only do 10 exercises for the rest of their life, what 10 would they pick? And I think it's an interesting thought exercise to hear what people prioritize and how they break down the question in terms of what are they optimizing for, like what sort of stimulus do they want to impose on their body going on forever if they could only choose 10. So I thought about this for a long time, and it's something that I think about for my own training specifically, in that I gym now a lot less than I used to. I'm trying to focus my energy towards the sports that I'm playing as I enjoy those more, and I'm a little bit less focused on gym-based performance goals now than I was when I was younger. So for me, the priorities for my gym-based training are to continue to move well, which will support my ability to continue playing and enjoying the sports that I like. At the moment, the main ones are kickboxing and paddle tennis, but I'll also occasionally do some jiu-jitsu and other racket sports. Those are the main ones that I'm sort of trying to keep my body in good condition for right now. The other priorities are to maintain good movement mechanics as I age, so the ability to do day-to-day tasks without worrying about throwing my back out or something like that, and also maintain reasonable body composition, so I'm not embarrassed to take my top off at the beach or the pool. So with that context in mind, this is how I've broken down my top 10 exercises if I could only do 10 for the rest of my life. The first one is pull-ups. So what I've put here is, it is the bar of truth. There's nowhere to hide. So this is an old school saying that I remember from my younger years starting in the gym, in that your body weight is your body weight, and can you lift it or can you not chin over the pull-up bar? And there's a lot of people who can be strong in other movements but can't do very many pull-ups or any at all. And I think that's, your relative strength is something that is always important. And in terms of bang for buck, which is a common theme you'll see throughout these exercises, I feel like the pull-up gives you so much. You're training your grip, you're training your back, your biceps, your core, all those important muscle groups. I think in terms of aesthetic benefits, if you get very good at pull-ups, your upper body is going to be in pretty good nick without having to do too many other exercises. And from a biomechanical perspective, we evolved from monkeys, so hanging and swinging from tree branches. A lot of our musculature reflects that. So there's something great about the simplicity of just hanging from one or two arms, and it stimulates a lot of the major muscle groups in a way that they don't get from traditional gym exercises. You'll find that, your lats, if you move reasonably well, your lats will get a great stimulus from any sort of hanging pulling. But you also get a lovely stretch through the trunk as well, just from hanging. And a lot of people advocate hanging as a practice for improving your shoulder health, which I think there's a lot of sense in as well. It's not a cure-all, but most people would benefit by doing more hanging. So I'm a big fan of pull-ups, and I thought this was a good excuse just to show off the fact that I once unlocked the single arm pull-up. Took me a long time, but I'm proud of it. So here we go. There's a little recap. And I think if you're working towards that as a goal, a lot of things take care of themselves along the way. Like, you're not going to be able to get to a single arm pull-up if you haven't got decent grip strength, arm strength, shoulder strength, core strength, and control from hanging. A lot of shoulder stability and trunk stability is required as well. So as an overall goal to have in the distance, even if you never get there, I think your body will really benefit by pursuing the underlying movement qualities that will unlock the single arm pull-up for you. So moving on to number 2 and number 3. Ring dips are my favorite push exercise. The reason is it's relatively unstable, probably not as unstable as a dumbbell or a kettlebell, but it does allow the rotation of the shoulder in a similar way to the free weight dumbbell presses as opposed to barbell pressing. I think a lot of people run into trouble with barbell bench press and similar exercises because of the fixed rotation between the hands. And I'm not saying you can't get away with doing those exercises and you can't continue to make a lot of gains with them, but in terms of longevity and working in accordance with how the human body likes to move, generally when you are making a press-like motion with your upper body, there is some rotation at the shoulder that accompanies it. If you think about throwing a punch, you're always turning your hand to maximize power output. If you're thinking about striking a ball in any sport, whether it's baseball, golf, tennis, there's always some rotation occurring in the shoulder joint as you make that movement. So allowing that through using the rings, I think is a great thing for working in harmony with your body rather than forcing it into specific angles and planes of motion that it didn't necessarily evolve for. The other beautiful thing about the ring dips is you can tweak it to bias whichever muscle group you want to work on more in terms of your push muscles. So if you lean more forwards, get more horizontal, then you're going to be asking more from the chest. If you are more upright, then you're going to be asking more from the triceps. If you look up Casper Winters, he is a great man for using mechanics to emphasize a certain stimulus for a certain muscle group, and he has some foot supported variations of dips which target the chest. So he might have foot supported ring dips or bar dips which are weighted, so you can create a more favorable loading vector for the chest muscles, for example. I also believe that if you get strong in ring dips, your shoulder stability will almost always level up to a greater extent than it would do if you just use the bars as well. So that's number 2. Number 3, you're probably surprised it took me to number 3. I am a huge advocate of all lunges, particularly walking lunges, and I put here silly lunges for the win. If you're not familiar, I am an advocate of all sorts of weird and wonderful lunge patterns, and at the Training Stimulus, we use them for a variety of reasons to help our clients improve their movement mechanics. So this will help them with any imbalances or injuries that they're dealing with, and also iron out some compensation patterns that might be holding back their performance. So our clients are known for these weird and wonderful, strange looking lunges that are incredibly powerful at improving the way people move. So that's just to explain the silly lunges for the win there. What we're doing with walking lunges is we are strengthening the body in a very similar movement pattern to walking or running. So in terms of the sequencing between which bones move first, which joints open or close, and which muscles lengthen and when they lengthen in relation to each other, we're getting very similar, and that means the carryover through to walking gait is tremendous, and we'll talk about it more later on, but I think that is what the human body has evolved for. It's almost indisputable in my mind. If you look at where how the bones rotate around each other, how the joints work, where the muscles originate and insert, it's very clear that walking is what our bodies are designed for. So if we strengthen it in accordance with that, we're going to do a lot better than if we try to fight our physiology by forcing ourselves into machines or some old school lifts that are fine, but not necessarily as in line with the way the human body likes to move, likes to be trained and strengthened. The point I put here is that these lunges can be tweaked endlessly and can create any stimulus you want. So with different stride lengths, stride widths, with different angles of the foot, toe in, toe out, with different drivers of the upper body. Are we reaching over? Are we rotating? We can ask the body to work certain muscles in certain ways to achieve any stimulus you want. And I really, really mean that. If you're creative enough, you can work your jaw whilst you are lunging. And the thing that I think most people will connect with on these lunges is that you get a huge bang for buck, and the carryover to other lifts is tremendous. So even if you are still very much squat, bench, deadlift focused, you can still improve those lifts in a big, big way by improving your walking lunge mechanics and strength. So I really couldn't encourage you to incorporate more walking lunges into your training. They are phenomenal. And just a quick flavor of a type of tweak we could make. I'm just going to mute the video so it doesn't definitely. So we've got a lunge with a lean here. So as you can see, the normal walking lunge, and then have a lean. And what this does, by pushing the hip to the outside of the knee, we lengthen the tissues on the lateral hip. So glute med, ITB, TFL, those sorts of tissues, which are obviously involved in running. And we teach the body to, one, activate those muscles, but also stabilize any deviations in the frontal plane. So you can imagine if you're running, maybe the road's a little bit uneven, or you step on something and your hip goes further out to the side than it normally would. For some people, that could cause pain or an injury in the worst case. But if you have trained the skill of stabilizing in the frontal plane like this, you're more likely to stay in better alignment and waste less energy as well, which is a big performance benefit, and return back to balance sooner and more effectively. So I think that's a big selling point for lunges, and we have literally hundreds of variations we can apply depending on what somebody's body needs to work better in the way that they would like it to. Okay, now we're getting on to number 4, the strict hinge. So the strict hinge is a variation of single leg deadlifting, and we're going to get very specific to isolate hip flexion without a change in knee bend and without loading of the back. So that's why I call it the strict hinge. David Gray does some phenomenal education on this movement in terms of what the key criteria are for not allowing compensation in other areas. Essentially, we don't want the knee angle to change. We don't want the pelvis to rotate. Generally, it will rotate away from this hip if we can't stretch the glute max. The right glute max is the one we're working. We don't want the knee to come forward or back, or some people will extend the knee early. And we essentially want to be shifting the hips back into this right glute max without excessive or much flexion of the spine. So there's plenty of cues to work through this, but the reason I have it in my top 10 exercises is this is a movement quality that a lot of people are poor at. We sit down a lot. There's a lot of athletes that have developed compensation patterns or strategies to avoid using their glute max because it's tight for whatever reason, because they don't have the skill to access it. But it is the biggest, strongest muscle in the body. So if there's anything you work on to try and improve your athletic performance, having highly functioning glutes would be very near the top of the priority list. So With this strict hinge setup, we can use it as a mobility exercise to stretch the glute and get into it. We can use it as a stability exercise to teach the hip to be more stable and therefore accept more work, because it's not going to be escaping loading in whether it's deadlifting, squatting, running, jumping, anything. And we can also teach the body to iron out common compensation patterns. Like if your back tends to get overloaded, one of the main reasons is you struggle to load your glutes. And finally, from a strength perspective, once you get good at this movement pattern, you can load it up pretty heavy, and then you'll get a very strong posterior chain from this as well. It carries over to almost every athletic endeavor, so very, very important movement to become proficient in. Number 5. So this I have stolen from Matt McInnes-Watson, because he can demo it far better than I ever will be able to. But as you can see, bounding is exaggerated gait. So we're building on our walking lunges, but adding some plyometric components to it. And the benefits of this are tremendous in terms of carrying over to sports, carrying over to running, and strengthening the tendinous side of our bodies as well. So a lot of training, we focus on muscles, but tendons have a huge part to play in terms of max power generation, reactive force production, and speed. So teaching that elasticity and shortening the stretch reflex cycle. Bounding is, I'd say, the foundational way to work on that. And what I've said here is that we can scale it up, we can scale it down, so we can do small, gentle, low amplitude bounds as a warm-up to get the body working together, to wake up all the tissues from the feet through to the head. And we can also use it as an exercise to improve our max force generation. If we're doing maximum distance bounds, we're putting as much force as we can into the ground with the goal of propelling ourselves as far as possible. So you can think of that as close to a 1 rep max in terms of potentiation and the ability to generate force. The final point I put here is that we can tweak bounds for change of direction and agility work. So you might see lateral bounds or rotational bounds. All of these carry over really well to field sports where we want to change direction suddenly, where we need to practice the skill of absorbing force into a quick stop and then reversing our direction or changing our direction. And yeah, it's really, really versatile in terms of what we can do with it. And I think plyometric work is essential for anybody who participates in sports where they're on their feet. Okay, number 6, the split stance Russian twist. So for sports, some degree of rotation is essential for pretty much all sports that most people would agree are sports, maybe not chess, but let's have a look at it here so you can get a feel for what I'm talking about. So notice I have 1 foot at the back, 1 foot at the front, and I'm focusing on rotation over the front leg. So what this does, I've got my shoulders rotated to the left and my pelvis is relatively rotated to the right because that right foot is back. It's really important to try and keep that right hip behind the left hip so we get that actual separation between the shoulder girdle and the pelvis. That means we actually achieve trunk rotation. What you'll notice in a lot of rotation exercises is that the shoulders and the hips rotate together, so there's not actually any separation between the shoulders and the pelvis, which means that trunk musculature doesn't get lengthened, which means it doesn't get activated, and you're actually not achieving any motion in rotation in the vertebrae. So you're not actually rotating your body, which is essential for achieving maximum power output. If you look at great strikers in martial arts, if you look at obviously good golfers, tennis players, anybody who plays a sport which requires rotation, which as I said earlier is pretty much all of them, they will have a good amount of rotation and separation between their pelvis and their shoulders. If you want to see this in action, one of the best examples would be Rory McIlroy. He has a phenomenal amount of separation between his pelvis and his shoulders, and he's one of the biggest hitters in golf, especially for his size. So I think it's a really important movement mechanic to work on and maintain for athletic performance. And the other thing I think it is great for is teaching an athlete to transfer force from the ground into their hands, which again is a fundamental currency in most sports. So teaching the body to push through the floor and generate power in the hands. Obviously in sports like boxing, this is really, really useful. So that's number 6. On to number 7. So this is a cool one, and one that I'm going to do a post about very shortly. Front foot elevated split squat variations. So similar to the walking lunges, this can be tweaked endlessly to achieve different stimuli. So we can use it purely as a mobility exercise to train foot mechanics, either in the front foot or the back foot, and that's what the post will be about, showing you how you can achieve that. You can also load it up heavy, loaded through dumbbells, through back rack, with a barbell, Zercher even, and you can play with the elevation. So this is an 18-inch box. You can use even a couple of inches, makes a big difference. And the impact on the body changes quite drastically depending on exactly how you set it up. So let's have a look at this one here, just to give you a sense of the sort of thing we can do. So this is a mobility focused split squat. So here we're working on pronation and supination mechanics. You can't really see it with this zoom, but you'll see there's a nice arch at the back when I'm in a supinated foot position. And then as we drift forwards, we shift the knee towards the toes, and we have a gentle flattening of the arch and spreading of the foot to go into pronation. So in this setup, we can control a lot about our body position. So working on early stance, mid stance, late stance, and the back foot. We can use heel elevation as well to improve that early stance mechanic. It's really, really powerful. And obviously the classic split squats are just going up and down, are great for building strength as well. And we can play with the amount of hip extension in the back leg, working on propulsion or toe off mechanics as well. So it's incredibly versatile for how we can not only improve our movement mechanics, but generate strength specific to whatever we're working towards, whether that's running or lifting. And that's all I've got to say for now on that one. Number 8, single arm ring rows. So as a nice accessory for pull-ups, again, you'll notice a theme that these exercises can be tweaked to favor specific aspects of movement. So with single arm ring rows, we can target specific muscles in the upper body, specific joint motions, whether we're side bending or rotating through the T-spine. We can improve the recruitment of our upper body musculature because it's blended with that T-spine mobility. So if you've watched my shoulder and overhead masterclass, you'll understand that shoulder function and thoracic spine movement are inextricably linked. So training them together is a really good idea to iron out the kinks. As all too often, we try to keep the trunk still whilst we train the shoulder, but that almost never happens in nature. If you think about animals, if you think about sports, again, going back to that rotation, think about Floyd Mayweather throwing a punch, it comes from his hips. He has trunk rotation, thoracic rotation, and then the shoulder goes. So that shoulder isn't just being punched from a stiff spine. And if you look at people who've done a lot of barbell training, they tend to rotate very poorly, run very poorly, throw very poorly. So here's one example that I'm enjoying at the moment, the foot elevated single arm ring row. So it's a ring row into sort of pull-up position, a great accessory for working towards a single arm pull-up. And the beauty of this one is you can adjust the amount of load through the amount of support you're using with your feet. But this bottom position has a lovely stretch through the lat as we can lean. You'll notice my left knee is slightly higher than my right knee, so I'm creating extra length through this lat in the frontal and the transverse plane by slightly reaching across my body. And the left arm you see is across towards the right. So big stretch in the bottom, which means a lot more activation of the lat, and then we can work that pull through a nice big range of motion, squeezing bang for buck out for every rep. In a similar theme, number 9, we have side planks with 3D motion. So we're focusing on the frontal plane and the transverse plane as the most often neglected planes of motion in most gym training. And you'll notice I've distinguished hanging shoulder stability and pushing shoulder stability because they are quite distinct. So here, you can imagine our body weight is pulling the shoulder out of the socket, whereas here, our body weight is pushing the shoulder into the socket. And these are different skills to work on. You'll find that some people are quite stable hanging because it activates different muscles, and some people are quite stable pushing because it activates different muscles. And there is a difference. So there is some carryover from one to the other, but you can have a very stable hanging shoulder without a very stable pushing shoulder, which is why I think it's a good idea to work on both separately if you like to pull and push, which most people do. So we're working on shoulder stability. Again, we're integrating it with T-spine motion, and we can tweak the setups to target either the shoulder, the core, or even the hips. So I'll show you a couple of variations here. We have the side bend. So here we're lengthening the obliques and the lateral hip, as well as asking that shoulder to stabilize in various levels of abduction and moving towards overhead adduction. Then the next variation we're going to look at is a full body transverse plane rotation. So we're going to reach under and then open up and rotate away. So here we're working horizontal adduction and abduction of the shoulder, and we're also opening up the chest, so asking the pec to stabilize the shoulder more through that horizontal abduction. And if somebody struggles with pec activation, this can be a great way to train it. As always, tweaks are endless. All the sort of classic side plank tweaks like starfish will make it more difficult, but the more subtle tweaks are the direction of the fingers. If you point the fingers forwards, if you point the fingers back, then that's going to place a different amount of rotation in the shoulder, which again trains different muscles, the nuances of which we won't go into today because it's quite a long discussion. But essentially, do a side plank, move in different directions, your trunk and your shoulders will really, really benefit. All right, number 10, bit of an anticlimax, running. I think it's what we evolved for, as I said at the very start. And if we focus on getting our body to have a good gait cycle and to run efficiently and effectively without any niggles or injuries, then a lot of the rest of our mechanics will take care of themselves. It's obviously a great form of cardio and can be done slow plodding all the way through to sprinting. If you can sprint well without causing problems, then your body is probably working pretty well. It's unlikely that you can sprint at full speed without causing issues and that you have much going on wrong or poorly in the lower body. So that's another great goal to have in the distance. I'm not saying that everybody needs to sprint all out very often, but as the ultimate movement screen, if you can sprint well, most things are going to take care of themselves. So getting from A to B is, whether you are sprinting or whether you're just walking to the shops to buy yourself some food, is a pretty fundamental survival skill. It's getting less so, sadly, with all the modern delivery apps, etc. But it is the underlying currency of movement, transportation from where we are to where we want to be. And if we want to continue moving into older age, then continuing to practice the skill of transporting ourselves from A to B, but also changing direction, as we talked about with bounding. Super important. So that would be the last one on the list for me, to make sure you get some cardio in, ideally whilst traveling somewhere at some speed. If I was to add anything more, the bonus exercises I would do would be some direct ab work, just from a vanity point of view. Most people like abs. So if you were to add something else, non-essential from a performance or functional perspective, but if you've got a nice six-pack, then many athletes enjoy that. You could do more sport-specific power work. So if I wanted to learn to hit the ball harder in golf, there are golf-specific setups where we could tweak the Russian twists, for example, to translate better into a golf swing or to throwing a punch in boxing. And the last one I've said is a low impact cardio option if you wanted to do more volume without the impact on your joints that running provides. Ideally, your body would work so well that you could run as much as you wanted to. But if that's not currently true, then while you build up your tolerance to increased workload and volume, then having a low impact CB option like the rower or cycling or even a cross trainer, I think is a useful tool to have in the toolkit. But to be honest, there's not much more that I think most people need to cover the vast majority of their fitness bases. So 10 exercises, provided that tweaks are allowed, is more than enough to address most of the human body's needs, in my opinion. If you've enjoyed the video and the topic, and I'd love to hear what you think of my 10 exercises, if there's any glaring gaps or things that you think I've missed or completely not considered, I'd love to hear about that in the comments. If you have any questions and like to discuss any of these points further, I love chatting to people, so please do get in touch. The best way is on Instagram at ashgrossmann.coach, and Grossman has a double N at the end. But thank you for your time, thank you for watching, and if you have any requests for future breakdowns, I'd love to hear them, and just drop me a message to speak about those as well. Thank you for your time, and I will speak to you soon.